9 out of 10 Mercedes buyers walk into a dealership without knowing that 3 of the brand's most popular models have repair histories that will cost them more in the first 5 years than a brand new economy car. That E-Class your neighbor bought last spring? It just generated its third 4-figure repair bill in 18 months. That C-Class the dealer pushed hardest during your last visit? It sits at the top of every independent reliability survey for the wrong reasons. 7 Mercedes models exist that mechanics privately call financial disasters. 3 exist that independent specialists drive themselves. Number 1 is the model that routinely hits 300,000 miles with nothing more than scheduled maintenance. Let us get into it. Number 10, the S-Class that became a warning label. The W220 S-Class looked like the future when it launched. Low, wide, silent, and dripping with technology nobody else had yet. That was also the problem. Mercedes rushed electronics into this generation faster than they could properly test them, and owners paid for it later. Airmatic air suspension failures became almost expected rather than occasional. A compressor dies, a strut leaks, and suddenly the car that was supposed to float over bumps is sitting crooked in a driveway. Wiring harnesses degraded with age, and that meant random warning lights with no consistent pattern. One day it is the ABS light. The next day it is a seatbelt warning that will not turn off. Rust became a real concern in wetter climates, eating away at subframes that were never designed to be inspected easily. Even the keyless entry and ignition system, cutting edge for its time, developed reputation for false alerts and occasional lockouts that left owners stranded in parking lots wondering what expensive module had failed this time. A car this technologically ambitious needed a service network ready to support it for 20 years, and by the time most examples reached the used market, that support had thinned out considerably. Mechanics still talk about the W220 as the generation that taught them to fear the words, check engine. A used one looks like the deal of the century on paper. The invoices that follow explain why the price dropped so far in the first place. Independent shops that specialize in this generation often keep a running list of parts to check before they will even quote a purchase inspection. Door lock actuators fail quietly, window regulators grind before they seize, and the navigation and climate control units develop faults that make simple tasks feel like troubleshooting a spacecraft. None of that stopped the W220 from selling well when it was new, because on the showroom floor it genuinely felt like the most advanced sedan money could buy. The gap between that first impression and the ownership reality is exactly why this generation opens the list. If the styling and the badge convinced you this one was safe, wait until you hear what the next generation did to owners who trusted the suspension even more. Number 9. The E-Class that punished comfort lovers. The W211 E-Class promised a smoother ride than almost anything in its class. It delivered that smoothness through Airmatic suspension, and Airmatic became the reason so many owners walked away from the badge entirely. Struts that once cost a fraction of the price to replace on simpler cars suddenly cost thousands on this one. Early examples also carried Sensotronic brake control, an electronic brake-by-wire system that sounded impressive in a brochure and terrified independent mechanics in real life. When SBC failed, braking performance could change without warning, and replacement was not cheap or simple. Mercedes eventually reverted to conventional hydraulic brakes on later examples, which tells you everything about how that experiment went. Reverting an entire braking philosophy mid-production is not something a manufacturer does lightly, and it is a quiet admission that the original engineering decision put too much faith in electronics that were not yet mature enough for a task this critical. Owners of early SBC-equipped models often describe a strange pedal feel, developing over time, a sensation that something in the system was degrading long before any warning light confirmed it. Add wiring faults, faded interior trim, and a transmission that needed scrupulous fluid changes to survive, and the pattern becomes obvious. Owners who kept meticulous service records and stayed ahead of every fluid change often escaped the worst of it, but that level of discipline is rare in the used car market where this generation now lives. Buy one from a seller who cannot produce a stack of invoices, and you are essentially gambling with parts that are individually more expensive than an entire used economy car. This was a car built to impress in the showroom and quietly punish the second or third owner. If you are enjoying this breakdown so far, hit the subscribe button now so you do not miss the reveal at number 1. The next model on this list burned an entire era of buyers who thought they were getting a bargain hatchback. Number 8. The compact Mercedes that compromised everything. The first generation A-Class and B-Class were supposed to bring Mercedes engineering to smaller budgets. Instead, they brought smaller budgets to Mercedes complexity. The continuously variable transmission fitted to many of these cars developed a reputation for hesitation, shudder, and premature wear that left owners stranded at low mileage. Electrical gremlins spread through the dashboard like a virus, with warning lights appearing and disappearing for no traceable reason. Interior materials that felt acceptable on day one aged faster than the badge suggested they should. Door cards, dashboard trim, and switchgear developed squeaks and loose fittings well before comparable Volkswagen or Audi products from the same era, which stung especially hard given the badge on the hood promised something above that competitive set. Owners often describe a sense of buying into a promise the car could not quite keep, a small Mercedes that never fully felt like a small Mercedes should. Even the sandwich floor safety design, genuinely clever in a crash, added weight and complexity that made routine repairs more expensive than a small car should ever demand. Owners who bought into the brand expecting Mercedes durability instead inherited compact car parts wearing a luxury price tag. Resale values collapsed early, which tells its own story about how confident the used market became in this generation. Suspension bushings wore faster than expected for a car marketed on Mercedes engineering credibility, and steering components developed play that made the car feel looser with every passing year. Buyers who chose this model because they wanted a cheap way into the brand often ended up spending more on repairs than they saved on the purchase price. A pretty badge on the trunk lid does not fix a transmission that shudders every time you pull away from a stop sign. The next car on this list looked even more glamorous, and it hid its expensive secret behind a folding hardtop roof. Number 7. The convertible that turned sunshine into debt. The R230 SL was gorgeous, fast, and dripping with technology that photographed beautifully in magazines. Active body control, the hydraulic suspension system meant to eliminate body roll almost entirely, became one of the most feared repair bills in the entire Mercedes lineup. When ABC struts or the hydraulic pump began failing, owners were often quoted repair figures that rivaled the value of a decent used car on their own. The retractable hardtop roof, engineering theater at its finest, added motors, sensors, and hydraulic lines that all needed to work in perfect sequence just to open the trunk. One faulty sensor could leave the roof stuck halfway, turning a weekend cruiser into a very expensive paperweight. Specialists who work exclusively on ABC systems can walk into a shop, listen to the pump cycle, and diagnose a developing fault before the driver has even noticed anything unusual, which tells you how well documented and how common these failures eventually became. A repair that starts as a single leaking strut can cascade into a full system, flush, and multiple component replacements once contaminated fluid works its way through the rest of the hydraulic network. Electronics throughout the cabin age the same way they did across this era of Mercedes, unpredictably and without much warning. Enthusiasts still love the driving experience this car offers when everything is functioning correctly. The V8 and V12 engines fitted to higher trims were genuinely strong and capable of high mileage, which almost makes the suspension and roof problems more frustrating. It means the drivetrain is rarely the reason these cars get parted out, and the supporting systems around it are. The phrase, "when everything is functioning correctly," is exactly why so many examples sit for sale with suspiciously low mileage and suspiciously vague service history. A car this beautiful should not require a lottery ticket's worth of hope every time you turn the key. The next model on this list traded convertible glamour for SUV size, and somehow managed to combine several of these same problems into one bigger, heavier package. Number 6. The SUV that combined every weak point at once. The W166 generation ML and GLE arrived with genuine improvements in comfort, technology, and refinement. It also arrived with a 9-speed automatic transmission that took years to mature, and early adopters felt every bit of that immaturity. Rough shifts, hesitation, and occasional harsh engagement became common complaints during the first several years of production. Diesel versions carried the added burden of complex emission systems, and AdBlue-related faults became a recurring source of dashboard warnings and dealership visits. Air suspension made a return appearance on higher trims, bringing the same expensive failure patterns that plagued the sedans on this list. Compressor whine became a familiar early warning sign for owners who knew what to listen for, usually arriving months before a strut finally gave out completely and left one corner of the SUV sitting noticeably lower than the rest. Replacing a full set of air struts on this generation could easily rival the cost of a small used car, which made the decision to keep or sell an aging example painfully simple for a lot of owners. Electronics throughout the cabin, from adaptive cruise systems to infotainment modules, added another layer of things that could quietly stop working. A heavy, complex SUV with all of these systems working together is not a car you want surprising you on a road trip. Owners who bought these SUVs to tow, haul, or drive long distances regularly reported that the combination of transmission hesitation and suspension faults showed up earliest under real-world load, not in gentle city driving. That matters, because a car that fails under the exact conditions it was marketed for is failing at the one job it was supposed to do best. This is exactly the point in the video where I ask you to do something before we go any further. comment below with the Mercedes model year you would never touch again, because your answer might save someone else from making an expensive mistake this week. And if this comparison is changing how you look at used luxury SUVs, the next entry proves that even a flagship coupe was not immune to the same expensive habits. Number 5. The flagship coupe that hid its problems behind glamour. The W221 era S-Class and its CL-Class coupe sibling represented the peak of Mercedes' ambition during their production years. Massive investment went into technology, sound insulation, and cabin materials that still feel special today. That same ambition meant an overwhelming number of electronic modules controlling everything from seat memory to night vision assistance. When one module failed, diagnosing the actual cause could take hours of dealership-level labor before a single part was even ordered. Air suspension issues returned once again, because Mercedes clearly loved this technology more than their long-term reliability statistics did. Distronic radar cruise control systems, while impressive for their era, could develop faults that disabled safety features entirely until repaired. Night vision cameras, air quality sensors, and massage seat modules all sat quietly in the background of the ownership experience until one of them failed and reminded the owner exactly how many things could go wrong in a single flagship badged vehicle. None of these features were individually unreasonable, but stacked together across a single car. They created a probability problem that eventually caught up with almost every long-term owner. Rust crept into certain examples in colder climates, particularly around wheel arches and subframe mounting points that were expensive to access. Owners who bought these cars, chasing flagship luxury at a fraction of the original price, often discovered the maintenance costs had not dropped nearly as much as the purchase price did. Independent specialists became essential here because dealership labor rates on a car in this complex could turn a modest repair into a 4-figure appointment before anyone even opened the hood. Even simple tasks like replacing a headlight assembly wired into an adaptive lighting system required diagnostic equipment that most home mechanics never needed to own on any other car. A car built to feel effortless when new can become exhausting to own once the warranty disappears and every system starts aging at the same time. If you're enjoying this countdown, hit like and share this video with someone who needs to know what they're getting into before buying one of these used luxury cars. The next entry proves that even Mercedes' bread-and-butter sedan, the one built in the highest numbers, was not safe from serious structural concerns. Number 4. The best-selling sedan. With a rust problem nobody talks about, the W203 C-Class sold in enormous numbers, which means enormous numbers of owners eventually discovered its two signature weaknesses. Certain 4-cylinder petrol engines suffered from balance shaft and timing, chain tensioner issues that, if ignored, could lead to serious internal engine damage. A rattling noise on startup was not something to dismiss as normal Mercedes character. Independent mechanics learned to listen closely during a cold start, because a faint rattle that disappeared after a few seconds could still be the earliest sign of a tensioner wearing toward failure months down the road. Owners who caught the noise early and addressed it before it worsened often avoided the worst outcomes entirely, which made pre-purchase inspections on this generation far more valuable than on almost any other Mercedes from the same decade. It was often the first sign of a repair bill that could reach thousands of dollars if left unaddressed. Rust became the second signature problem, particularly around the rear subframe and wheel arch areas in cars that spent winters on salted roads. A car can look immaculate on the surface while hiding corrosion in structural areas that only reveal themselves during an inspection or, worse, during a failed safety check. Electrical faults were less catastrophic here than in the flagship models, but they were still frequent enough to be a constant background irritation. Window regulators, door lock actuators, and various sensors developed a reputation for needing replacement. Well before a car this expensive should have required it. Some markets saw entire batches of this generation fail emissions or safety inspections purely because of corrosion in areas inspectors specifically knew to check. That reputation followed the car into the used market, where knowledgeable buyers now budget for a rust inspection the same way they budget for a test drive. This was the generation that proved Mercedes' reliability problems were not limited to overloaded flagship technology. Sometimes the simplest, most popular model on the lot has the most expensive secret waiting underneath. That closes out the 7 models built to test your patience and your bank account, and it is time to flip this entire video around, because the next 3 cars prove Mercedes can build something that refuses to die. Number 3. The SUV built like it was designed for a war zone. The G-Class, particularly the earlier W166 examples, was never designed with modern complexity in mind. It was built on a ladder frame borrowed from military vehicle thinking, with solid axles front and rear and mechanical simplicity that predates most of the electronic gremlins on this list. owners in genuinely harsh environments, deserts, mountains, war zones, and remote farmland, have kept these trucks running for decades with nothing more than routine maintenance. The body sits on the frame rather than being integrated into it, which means rust and collision damage do not automatically threaten the vehicle's structural integrity the way they do on a unibody Mercedes. Engines fitted to these trucks were chosen for durability first and refinement second, a rare priority order for this brand. Diesel variants in particular built a reputation for shrugging off poor fuel quality and long stretches between services in a way that would have stalled almost anything else on this list within a single winter. Owners who genuinely use these trucks off-road, rather than parking them outside a shopping center, report the same conclusion again and again, that the mechanical foundation underneath the luxury trim simply refuses to give up. Yes, later electronic conveniences crept in as the model aged into the modern era, and yes, those additions brought some of the same sensor-related quirks found elsewhere in the lineup. Strip away the modern infotainment screen and the differential locks still work the same way they did decades ago, through simple, repairable mechanical systems. Parts availability remains excellent because the platform has stayed in production for so long that specialists know it inside and out. Aid organizations and expedition outfitters have relied on this platform for decades precisely because it can be repaired far from a dealership, often with basic tools and a willing mechanic. That real-world track record, in conditions most luxury cars never see, is a far more honest reliability test than any showroom brochure. A vehicle that was never asked to be delicate simply has fewer delicate things to break. That toughness earns it a spot on this side of the list, but the next model proves that even a standard sedan can be engineered to outlast almost everything Mercedes has built since. Number 2. The sedan engineers still call overbuild. The W124 E-Class, produced from the mid-1980s through the mid-1990s, is the car Mercedes engineers still reference when explaining what the brand used to stand for. Panel gaps were measured to a precision that modern manufacturing rarely bothers matching, and the doors famously closed with a reassuring vault-like solidity that owners still talk about today. Under the hood, the inline-six petrol engines and the diesel variants were built with a mechanical simplicity that makes modern turbocharged, electronically managed engines look fragile by comparison. Taxi fleets across Europe ran these cars past 300,000 miles with nothing more than disciplined oil changes and basic maintenance. Electronics existed, but they were limited and robust rather than sprawling and fragile, which meant far fewer of the mystery faults that plagued later Mercedes generations. Rust protection improved significantly over the W123 that came before it, thanks to galvanized body panels that Mercedes introduced partly in response to complaints about earlier models. That single improvement alone extended the practical lifespan of this generation well beyond what most manufacturers were achieving at the time, and it is a big part of why so many examples are still registered and driven daily decades later. Diesel versions in particular built a cult, following among high-mileage drivers who valued a car that simply started every morning without drama, regardless of temperature or how long it had been sitting. Suspension components were designed to be serviced and replaced affordably rather than swapped as expensive sealed assemblies. Even the paint and rubber seals were specified to a standard that later cost-conscious generations quietly walked back, and owners who compare a well-kept W124 to a modern equivalent can often feel that difference just by closing a door. Mechanics who trained during this era still describe working on the W124 as a lesson in what built to last actually meant before badge marketing took over the conversation. This was, by most accounts inside and outside the company, the last Mercedes generation engineered without cost-cutting compromises steering every decision. Owners who find a well-maintained example today often describe it as the closest thing to a mechanical guarantee that the used car market can offer. That guarantee sets an extremely high bar, and yet there is one Mercedes generation that arguably earned an even stronger reputation for refusing to quit. Number 1. The Mercedes that refuses to die. The W123, built from 1976 through 1985, is the car most responsible for Mercedes' reputation as a brand that builds vehicles for the long haul. Its diesel engines, particularly the naturally aspirated inline-5 and inline-4 units, became legendary for reaching distances that most modern engines will never see. Taxi drivers across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East ran these cars past 500,000 miles, and plenty of documented examples crossed the million-mile mark with nothing more than religious maintenance. The mechanical design was almost stubbornly simple, built in an era before Mercedes trusted computers to manage more of the car than absolutely necessary. Fuel injection, where fitted, was mechanical rather than electronic, which meant fewer sensors and fewer opportunities for the kind of unexplained faults that haunt later generations on this list. A skilled mechanic with basic tools and genuine patience can keep one of these engines running almost indefinitely, replacing wear items as they age rather than chasing software faults or proprietary diagnostic codes. That accessibility is part of the legend, because a car anyone can understand and repair tends to get repaired instead of scrapped, generation after generation of owners passing it along rather than letting it die in a junkyard. Compare that to the earlier entries on this list, where a single failed module can require specialized software just to reset a warning light, and the philosophical gap between these two eras of Mercedes becomes impossible to ignore. The badge stayed the same for decades. What Mercedes chose to prioritize behind that badge did not, and the W123 is the clearest proof of what the brand was capable of before complexity became the default answer to every design question. Body panels were thick, doors were heavy, and the entire car was engineered with a philosophy that assumed customers wanted decades of service, not just a warranty period of good behavior. Rust was, and still is, the honest weak point of this generation, and any used example deserves a careful inspection of the floor pans, wheel arches, and structural rails before purchase. That single vulnerability is a small price to pay for an engine and drivetrain combination that mechanics across the world still describe with genuine reverence. Parts remain available, specialists still know these cars intimately, and a well-kept example can realistically be driven daily well into its 5th decade on the road. Collectors now pay a premium for clean, rust-free examples, precisely because the reputation this generation built has never faded, even as newer Mercedes models have struggled to match it. Ask any independent Mercedes mechanic which car they would hand to a family member with no money for repairs, and the W123 comes up more often than any modern model wearing the same badge, often without a moment of hesitation. That kind of unanimous trust from the people who actually open the hood for a living is worth more than any spec sheet or brochure ever printed. This is the car that proves durability was never about badges, technology, or brochure promises. It was about building something so mechanically honest that time itself struggled to wear it down. Thanks for watching. Click on the next video to see which luxury cars look cheap to buy but become expensive to own. 7 of these Mercedes generations chased technology faster than they could perfect it, and their owners paid the price in warning lights and repair invoices. 3 of them proved that simplicity, discipline, and honest engineering can outlast almost anything on the road. If this changed how you look at a used Mercedes, share it with someone still shopping. Subscribe for more hidden reliability breakdowns before your next used car mistake finds you first.